Buzzard. Nice. Yeah, I'll have a coffee. Cheers. Hello. Yeah, I got time.
Sonic's new 2024 gravity rods, helping you reach distances you've never managed before. Distances portrayed in this sequence are exaggerated for comedic purposes. Real-world results may vary from those displayed. For 2024, Sonic are releasing a new and improved version of the gravity rods. Now, these rods I've actually been able to see progress throughout the years just in my time at CARPology. But go back even further than when I started CARPology, these came out, I think, around the 2014 year. But fast forward on to November 2018, I met up with Frank Warwick out in Belgium to film the then new gravity rods. And as you can see from his iconic casting technique, he was blasting those rods back then very, very far. But there's a few things that have changed since those versions, and on to December 2020, I think it was. I filmed him again, once again, with the Gravity FWs. Those are his signature rods with Sonic. And then fast forward even further to these, which will be available in early 2024. It's actually currently December 2023, so I'm very privileged to have my hands on these a few months earlier than everyone else, but that's the perks of the job. And these are the latest, newest improved gravity rods, and I can vouch for that because, as I said, I've seen these throughout the years, and these are by far the best gravity rods I've used from them. And an even better point about this is that because technology's advanced throughout all those years and things have become more readily available, whereas the previous iterations of the gravity rods may have been quite pricey, so only a select few people could get them, people that thought, yeah, I'll branch out a bit more and buy something that costs a bit more. Not as many people bought them, but now these are much more readily available. And I get onto the prices at some point in this video, so you'll have to keep watching to hear that. But believe me, it's worth waiting for. Now, with me today, I've got a 12-foot 3 1/4 test curve rod and also a 10-foot 3 pound rod. Now, there's several different models available. You've got two 10-foot models. You've got the 3 pound and the 3.5 pound. And then moving over to the 12-foot options are 3 pound, 3 1/4 and 3.5. And then there's one 13-foot model, which is your out and out distance casting at 13-foot 3.75 pound test curve. And the last rod in the whole range is a 12-foot spot and marker. So it doesn't matter if you're going for maybe the slightly shorter distance, but I'll get onto the cast capabilities of these in a second. Whether you're going for shorter range and more intimate venues, the 10-foots, all the way up to casting as far as you possibly can with the 13-foot 3.75s. There's something in the range that should suit many of you. Got there eventually. Now, I've had my hands on these all day and I've been casting countless times. My arms are going to feel it tomorrow. So I feel like I can talk quite at length about how well these cast, both in range and the accuracy. But how exactly do they do that? Well, starting off with the blanks themselves, they are a high modulus, low resin carbon. Now, what that actually means is that there's loads and loads of good carbon and very little resin. The resin is what comes with weight and also over time can degrade and start to make rods a bit floppy, which is why some older rods which had much more resin in can get really, really soft over time. So the less resin, basically the better. The more carbon, the stronger, stiffer, slimmer, and just more responsive rods you're going to get. And that's exactly the case with this. So pretty lightweight. Of course, I'm not exactly sure of the weight because I've got a big Tornos reel on this one at the moment, which has been helping me cast those bigger distances because it's a reel that's designed to go with these rods. The rod that I've had with me today is just the 12-foot 3 1/4, so it's kind of your mid-range distance rod. It's not your out-and-out distance rod, but I've been able to cast some super mega distances, and that's with a baited rig, 18-pound line. So it's not like I've used a 0.3 mono with a big shock leader just to show that it casts far. This has been 18-pound line all the way through, and it's still been casting really great distances. I've not been wrapping it out for exact measurements because I don't think that really matters, because it varies from person to person on how well you can actually cast a rod. But the feel of them is that they're extremely responsive. The tip snaps back nice and quickly, and that's thanks to the fact that they've got slightly more minimalistic guides now. I'm gonna have to get my phone out because I'm trying to remember the abbreviation of these guides was a bit of a mouthful. So the guides are C-Guide TDG PVD coated DL black guides. All right. So we've got 50mm ringing pattern all the way up to an anti-frap tip on the 12-foot models and the 13-foot models, but we don't have the 50mm eye on the 10-foots because, of course, you're not casting as big a range. And I also think a 50mm eye on a 10-foot rod or smaller can often look a bit out of balance. It doesn't really suit the size of the rod, and yeah, so they don't have 50mm on the 10-foot options, but they do on the 12s and 13s, so that's worth noting. The reel seat is a 17mm DPS reel seat, so that will fit all manner of different big pits. As you can see, it's a big old chunky Tornos reel I've got on here today, and that fit on there with absolutely no issues whatsoever. When it comes to cosmetics, It's fairly understated, nicely looking. You've got the blue weapons, which I've come to see through the gravity rods throughout the years that they've been doing these. So you've got a little bit on the reel seat there and there. I don't think there's anything at the top end on these ones, but I did notice on the 10 foots, you've got some blue weapons around the first eyes. There's a slight difference. Then you've got a Japanese shrink wrapped handle, all the way down to a slightly flared butt grip, flared butt grip. So it's really good for gripping on when you're hitting those distances. And even if this gets wet and slightly more slippy, you've still got that at the bottom to stop your hand from slipping off. And on the very bottom, we've got a logo of the Sonik logo, and that's a nice hard metal as well, nice and hard wearing. So the graphics and detail and look of them are really sleek, really understated, and I think they look the part, and they have done throughout all the years. But as I said, all those things combined with the resin, the low resin carbon, the lighter guides and everything, it means that these casts probably the best that these rods ever have done, because the guides are so much lighter. The tip can whip back a lot better, and it will just be more responsive. You can whip the rod through the air quicker, and as you can see from these shots, I was casting it at good range repeatedly and not tiring me out either. So I was casting, the only bit that's tiring me out was cranking it back in from those distances every time to do it again and moving the camera and getting another shot. So it consistently cast really good distances. But then I also wanted to try some more closer range stuff. So I clipped up to the far margin, which is overhanging trees in a little bay. Perfect to just to test the accuracy. And I'd say still probably around the 60, 70 yard mark. So still a fair distance to be accurate. And that's one thing that it still is accurate. As you can see, repeatedly hitting that spot over and over again and not sort of deviating too much. Maybe this far to the right, this far to the left. That's just down to me. But the rod was very responsive. And even though it's a bit more of a casting rod, didn't feel overgunned for those smaller distances. So it's nice to know that whether you're fishing at great range or shorter range with the gravities, there's no problem whatsoever with the 12 foot. So I don't know about the 13 foots yet, but I'm sure it's going to be the same as it has been throughout the years. But of course, I then tried the 10 foots. Now, of course, a 10 foot is more designed for smaller venues, something a bit more intimate. So if you're doing margin work or just underarm flicks or smaller distances, that's probably when you'd go down the 10 foot range. But don't be fooled into thinking that that's all it can do. So I still gave these rods a bit of a blast. Of course, they feel like they're at their limit a bit more because they're smaller, a bit easier to whip around. They just feel like they're lacking a little bit with the real distance that the 12s and the 13s will reach. But if you went for a 10 foot model, which more and more people are doing, because we're seeing just how good a 10 foot rod is for smaller venues and larger, rest assured that whether you're fishing a smaller venue, close quarters, or you're going somewhere that's slightly bigger and you need to fish probably about 100 yards or so, you should still be able to get the 10 foots to those sort of distances. So don't worry, you're not going to be undergunned on bigger venues. Of course, if you're going further than that, you will be pushing it with the 10 foots, which is when you then go up to the 12s or the 13s. But as well as being able to cast great distances, I clipped that rod up to exactly the same spot I was casting the 12 foot rod to see how accurate it was. As I said, probably around the 60, 70 yard mark. And again, hitting that point every single time. Now, of course, this goes down to casting ability, but if a rod's really good, you can feel the difference, and you're being that accurate repeatedly, again, as you can see, hitting that same spot multiple times with this setup just shows that it is capable of doing both further distance work, closer range, and being really accurate. And I love casting smaller rods, 10 foots, 9 foots, at closer range into little pockets like that. I actually find them more accurate than larger rods. As you saw today, both have done it absolutely fine. Now, of course, I like to say that all of those successful casts are just down to me, but it is down to another thing that's been put into these rods called ATC. Now, that stands for anti-torsion core, which in simple terms stops your rod, stops the blank from doing that when it's under load. So when you're casting the rod, it's not doing that, because if that happens, you're losing accuracy because that rod isn't as responsive. It's not going exactly where you want it to. So the less of that and more straight up and down where you're pinging a rod will mean that it pings that lead exactly where you're looking and where you want it to go. So if it goes left or right, that's probably down to you and not so much down to the rod. And finally, the prices. You'll be pleased to know that they start from just $119.99, and that's with the 10-foot models. The 12 foots go up to $129.99 RRP, and lastly, the 13-foot 375 test curve rod comes in at $139.99 RRP. So for more information on any of these rods and the rest of the range, maybe the reels that you've seen today, the little Tornos, and this little extractor, which I'm going to be talking about sometime in the future, then do check out the Sonik website, and sure, there'll be more videos coming from us in the future. So make sure you subscribe to us and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future uploads, including stuff on these rods and reels and also much, much more. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you again soon.